Do you know what a troll is?
I think it's a creature that lives under a bridge and frightens goats.
You spend too much time with first graders.
I do.
There are also people who use the news to manipulate a perspective and gain attention for their cause. So case in point, a recent headline was shared in Newsweek by Ryan Holiday, who wrote Trust Me, I'm Lying about media manipulation. And he said that some people like Jacob Wohl and Michael Avenatti, who've been in the news, use sensational or yellow journalism to create a scandal. They don't care if the facts are true. They don't care if they're called out. They want the attention.
Interesting. So that's a troll.
That's a troll.
That's a troll. Well, did you know that the word propaganda was actually originally held in a positive light? The term propaganda apparently, when it first came out into common use in Europe, it was the result of missionary activities of the Catholic Church. And in 1622, Pope Gregory created in Rome the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith.
You just forgot Roman numerals, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Because written right here in the script is Pope Gregory XV. And I thought, what is XV? I'm so glad you're saying that.
I believe
because
it's
I
the
didn't
15th,
remember either.
But at this point, we're going to go with Pope Gregory.
Okay, Pope Gregory.
Pope Gregory.
So how did propaganda gain the negative connotation that it has now? And what are some of the tactics that we use to promote agendas?
Well, those are great questions. And I, for one, am looking forward to talking with our guests, Chris Worthy and Thomas Riddle, about how to decipher what we read and make sense of that, because that's part of informational literacy and learning how to discern information that's coming to us and have a better understanding of that.
So today we'll gain insight on how words can create perspectives, ignite legends, and become catalysts for slogans. Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
So my friend Chris is a wife, mom of adult children, a former lawyer who has turned writer. She has spent 20 years writing for local and regional publications and is currently writing a book which is absolutely going to be a #1 bestseller about cultivating experiences of awe for a better life.
Welcome, Chris.
So tell us a little about what's going on in your life right now.
Well, I'm always writing words and staying busy doing that, researching and enjoying life.
So what does the awe of a better life mean?
Well, cultivating experiences, there's actually a really, some really strong science that points to the fact that if we spend more time experiencing awe, it is good for our mental health and even for our physical health. And it even makes us more altruistic toward our fellow man, makes us a better citizen and a better human.
I'm liking that. This is going to be a bestseller. I can feel it.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Tom Riddle is the assistant director of the Roper Mountain Science Center, which is a multifunctional facility with a living history farm, planetarium, and rotating science programs. He's also an instructor at Furman University. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a native of Greenville, South Carolina, which is few and far between these days, a rare breed. I've always had a passion for learning and for history. So while I'm the assistant director at the Science Center, I'm liberal arts educated. So I have a background in just a little bit of everything. And that has actually kept me curious and in awe of life, and has kept me always wanting to pursue other activities and to learn more. And so as such, I'm a history teacher by trade. That's where I spent most time in the classroom teaching, and a little bit of time in administration as a principal and curriculum coordinator. So lifelong educator. And I love learning and love talking about why it's important to be educated. And today's topic falls right in line with that.
So, Chris, tell us a little bit about how you got into writing.
Well, the short answer to that is accidentally.
Okay.
But the longer answer is that I had been practicing law for a little while. My undergraduate degree is in history and political science, and then I practiced law for a few years, had my youngest child, and we had an opportunity to move here to the upstate of South Carolina. So I took that time to stay home with them for a little while, and after about 6 months realized that there was a reason why I had always either worked or been in school. And as funny as this sounds, given the state of print media today, there was actually an ad in our local paper seeking freelance writers and part-time writers. And with no evidence that I could do the job, an editor gave me a chance. And I At every point when I've intended to go back to law practice, my writing career has been at a point where I was able to make a choice. I'm very grateful for that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, Thomas, I know that you also do a little bit of writing. So tell us what you're working on right now.
Oh, goodness. Well, we have a great new project coming to Ripper Mountain Science Center, which is we're opening in the late fall of 2020, a 30,000 square foot building that's focused on sustainability science and environmental science. And so a lot of what I'm doing right now in terms of research and writing curriculum has to do with those topics. With sustainability, what is sustainability? It's more than just going green. We've got, that includes social justice. That includes a lot of topics that most people don't think of. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm doing right now is research and design around making exhibitry for this new building, which has been fantastic to get to do that. I love space design. I love how we can create spaces to immerse people in their senses, to create opportunities for them to be totally engaged with what they're learning. So research shows, science shows that if you are emotionally engaged with a topic, then you are much more likely to remember it. And so if I'm wanting to teach, then why not create an environment like that that's going to promote learning? And so that's what I'm spending a lot of time on doing right now, building design, exhibit design.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Let's plunge right in then.
I'm so excited for this topic because I think we have chosen some of the best guests ever.
Let's see.
All right.
Bar's high. So, Chris, is there a difference between good propaganda and bad propaganda?
Well, I think I'm a little bit reluctant to assign morality to the concept of propaganda because it really it's the propagation of an idea. And just as you would propagate seed to grow a crop, it really is the sowing of an idea. But I think that certainly you can have motives behind that can be good or bad. You can have outcomes that can be good or bad. So if you look at it from that perspective, I think that's true.
So can you give us an example?
Well, we have two educators here, and one that I thought of that I think has taken off is that you can't go into a healthcare facility or a school without seeing posters that teach children to cough into their elbows, which sounds like an odd thing, but it's the truth, right, Amy? And that has been a positive campaign that has, kids grow up knowing that now. But another one that I think has been really profound has been with anti-tobacco. And though, as I learned in looking at this topic, the tobacco companies have vastly outspent any of the nonprofits and even the CDC in trying to promote their product. The anti-tobacco ads have been extremely effective in reaching young people and in teaching them some of the possible outcomes. And you could certainly argue that it's propaganda because they have employed all of the elements of that. There have been some scare tactics and humor and every way to try to engage people and shift their thinking on that subject.
Well, that's a great example because it does. I can immediately bring up some of those ads, and you have that emotional connection to that person's life that has now been changed because of that, and to use that as a story leverage to get maybe a point across, I think is an excellent example.
What do you think?
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. Actually, when you said that, I was thinking about a time when I was at Boys State many years ago at the Citadel, and there was a poster on the wall that was an anti-tobacco poster, and it unfortunately dealt with a student, and he dipped tobacco as teenage years, developed a cancer in his lip. So they showed the progression in these pictures. His family had cooperated with this campaign and showed a hole in his lip, and then the removal of his lip, and then the removal of his jaw, and then that later he died just from doing something as innocent as that. And so you're talking about, scare tactics, right? And, in social studies, we often call that like doomsaying, where that's a propaganda type, right? That you can, and it can be good or bad. It can make a prediction that if this happens, then, or if this continues, then this will happen. And so if you do not cough into your elbow, then everyone will get the flu. If you cough into your elbow, we'll all be healthy. It all depends on your motive and how you pitch it. Are you wanting to go towards the negative? That's when it becomes doomsaying. Okay, if you don't do this, then that's going to happen. That's going to be bad. If you do this, then this positive thing will happen. So I agree with that. Propaganda in and of itself, I mean, it is what it is. It's how we use it. It's how we use words or images that determines whether it's good or bad. And then again, that's subjective. If we think somebody might think it's positive, and some others may say it's negative.
Right.
I used to teach in U.S. history. I used to teach a lot with propaganda, especially around war posters, and how imagery is used along with words, and what kind of words are used, to get an idea across. And early on, marketing consultants were hired by the government to say, how do we get Americans behind this war? We see how important it is, but it's not here. And so they said, go after the emotions.
Yeah.
Go after the emotions. And so, like you said, that can be powerful.
Well, that leads us right into our next question, because actually 4 million copies of the I Want You Uncle Sam posters were printed between 1917 and 1918. That's 1 year time. 4 million posters were presented. The We Can Do It posters with Rosie the Riveter, those were created in 1943. So it's very interesting, the time frame. Sometimes we get those kind of iconic posters mixed up in our minds, but one came for one war, one came for another war. Only 1,800 copies were made for that, and it was made for the Westinghouse Company. This woman was never known as Rosie the Riveter until the 1980s. So it's very interesting to me when we think about those images, and sometimes they do kind of merge in our minds. But I'll throw this to you.
I was gonna jump in on that Rosie the Riveter poster, because I was writing an article about that for some client a week or two ago. When that campaign was going on, the number of women who worked in construction and plumbing was extremely high. And then, of course, they stopped the campaign, and sort of there was a cultural shift in the 50s, and a lot of women who had been working in factories went back home. But then the 60s and 70s, women started coming back into the workforce. But they never went back into construction and plumbing, and it's something like 0.5% of construction workers and plumbers are women, and almost all of them work in offices. Hardly anyone is a Rosie the Riveter. So the campaign, I guess, worked, and then it never happened again.
Interesting.
On scale.
Yeah, the U.S. government, when they were laying out their plan for these posters and how to encourage people to get involved in the war effort, there were some that were specifically aimed at women, and saying, okay, because women, we need you, because they did. The men were in overseas fighting. They were vital to the war effort. There was a whole series on race relations of posters on unity. Although there was racism that was rampant throughout the United States at the time, the federal government understood that we've got to create a unifying feel, okay, for this. And so there was, Joe Lewis, who was the heavyweight champion. He's drafted like so many other celebrities, and then he was put on the campaign trail to raise funds, war bonds, things like that. But it's funny what you're talking about, that with women. That campaign goes after women to get in the workforce, but then it kind of goes away. And then we see in the 70s and 80s, and especially by the 80s, when Rosie's back out as almost a symbol of pride for women. I would love to see what the connection was, how much it was used in the ERA movement, because I do not know that for a fact, or how much it was. But, when you start having equal rights with women and saying, we are just as strong as men, or just as valuable in the workforce, but yet they're not going into those trades. Of course, we're losing trades across the board. That's another discussion.
That'll be another topic.
That's a whole other topic we could get into.
Yeah.
But let's talk about, those were the methods of that time.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the current methods of propaganda. We think about memes, tweets, psychological art on social media. And so, Thomas, I'm going to throw this out to you. Can you give us maybe some things that happen, especially because at this point with social media, it's instantaneous? What happens to the type of propaganda and the images we're getting now? What are some of the things that you're seeing?
Manipulation of images, manipulation of words is rampant. When I was in the classroom teaching propaganda, I was looking over, some old notes I used to use and thinking, wow, these things are so relevant. Misquoting, okay, is a propaganda technique. And so you take part of a quote, the actual word somebody says, and you plug it in out of context. You'll see this with memes. You'll see this with tweets all the time. I'm pretty active on Twitter and social media, and you'll see that constantly. And that's only part of the story. And of course, they'll leave out the rest of the context often because somebody's wanting to pitch a certain point of view. I do some work around AR and VR, augmented reality and virtual reality, in educational uses. And so I was watching something the other day about how easy it's becoming to manipulate someone's voice and words and take actual video and make someone say anything you want them to say. You can map just a few minutes of their speech patterns, and then you can replicate it into sound bites. And so that's the problem today, one of several, I think, but we operate off sound bites. We don't do deep reading. We don't do close reading. We don't search for multiple sources. We're too busy thumbing up that screen to go to the next thing. And so we feel like, oh, I'll get my truth from one sentence or one image. I think about one of the images that was used with the child who was, is being broadcast across media networks as the immigrant child who had been separated from her mother. That wasn't just the story. There wasn't a separation thing. It was just they had been stopped, and this was the image that was taken, but it was shown in the context of, well, this was separation. We're so connected now that misinformation can go viral, now. So that's where it becomes dangerous, when no one thinks to fact check. As a history major at Furman University, I remember, never forget, first time I realized that there were magazines that had political biases was in a 20th century history class taught by Dr. Marion Strobel. We had to do a research topic on the Vietnam War. And I had to research any topic on the Vietnam War and use Newsweek and U.S. News and World Report. Newsweek with the more liberal slant of the coverage, U.S. News and World Report with a more conservative slant. I used to do this with my kids. We would take, this was 20 years ago even, and we would take headlines from the internet from CNN and Fox News, 15 years ago. And same event, how is one headline written and how's another headline written? Mm-hmm. And so we were taught, and as historians, to go deep, look for words. How are words used? What's the motivation behind? Who funds the magazine? Where does the funding come from? Follow the money. Mm-hmm. Always follow the money. Mm-hmm. Who's paying for the messaging? Mm-hmm. And so in today's connected world, people don't take the time to do the critical thinking required often. I said people. Now that's another one. That's a broad general statement. And that's another form of propaganda, broad generalizations. But I'm saying there are so many people. I see as a teacher so few people who stop to think critically. And that's one of the reasons that we have issues, I feel like, with this misinformation that we're looking at today.
Excellent. How about you, Chris?
Well, you talked a lot about misinformation, which I think is true, but one of the things that I found in looking at this is the intentional use of social media and message boards to very quickly drive these kind of campaigns. And I'm not going to repeat what this phrase is, but just trust me when I tell you this is a politically biased 3-word phrase that I read a story about. The New York Times actually did a study on this phrase, how they plotted public posts, starting with Twitter, and how many times it appeared over the course of several days. And I made a note that it was a handful of tweets on the first day. By the second day, it had jumped to other social media platforms. By the third day, it was in a meme. A television network used it by the 5th day. By the 8th day, it had tens of thousands of uses on the internet. And this is just in public posts, not just in private message boards and stuff. By the 9th day, a meme had been created showing somebody wearing the phrase on a T-shirt. Now, it might have been photoshopped on the T-shirt, or it might have been a real T-shirt, I don't know. By the 10th day, this was completely mainstream. And it had started on a message board and spread and was swaying public opinion in a way that we could not have dreamed of just a couple of decades ago. But I think that what you said is absolutely correct about tracking the gatekeepers. Who is funding this? Where is it coming from? And one of the things that you mentioned about comparing the two magazines, do you think that, and this may be a politically charged question, but do you think that the elimination of the fairness doctrine in broadcast media has played a role in kind of where we are today? Because there are some that argue for and argue against it. But if you look back, we had both the elimination of the fairness doctrine and the rise of the internet and social media happening simultaneously. So it's kind of hard to say which one has created this scenario. But I think you could argue at least that.
For those who may not know, can you just summarize the fairness doctrine?
Sure. The fairness doctrine was an FCC regulation where if you had a broadcast license, you had to give not equal time, but at least consideration to opposing viewpoints. And that was eliminated. It was started, I think, I want to say the 40s or the 50s when we had just a few broadcast networks. And there was the concern that if opposing viewpoints weren't also given airtime, that there would be a manipulation of the American way of thinking about certain topics. So the goal was to prevent a media corporation from being able to manipulate a group of people. And then it was in, I think, the 80s, I want to say mid-80s, late 80s, when it was eliminated by the FCC. So we had, both of these divergent paths happening at the same time. And I'm not sure which one bears more weight in that, but I think it's worth considering that now we have networks that not only skew one way or the other, but far off the realm of what we'd normally expect in media coverage.
Yeah, that would be interesting. A road to go down, I think, because I know at that time there was a lot of concern that, those who have the money will control the messaging. The concern at the time was, public radio is going to be left behind. And, people who the little man's voice is going to get left behind. And at the time, it was pitched as almost this argument between conservative and liberal. And like conservative radio would have, or media would have more sway because there's more money or such. And it's funny because now you hear the criticism is kind of topsy-turvied. Again, you go back to the gatekeepers. Did the internet change that then? Does Google change that? Because suddenly you have one corporation that gatekeeps. You can have...
Well, Facebook.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Oh, yeah, exactly. So you can have primetime networks, right, that you could say they are the mouthpiece for so much truth. Well, who funds that, right? But then let's look at just those two platforms, Google and Facebook, and can control whatever they want. They're private businesses.
Right.
And so they can, to an extent, people can get banned. People can get... Same thing with Twitter. And so now you're starting to get people that have the ability to determine what we see when in an era when more people are getting their news from the internet or information from the internet than they do from television. How does that play in? And does the fairness doctrine need to come back? I
don't know how you do it.
I don't know either. It's like Pandora's box, right?
It is. But there was a great story, and I realize the irony is not lost on me that I shared it on social media. But it was the New York Times, I think, pretty sure. The New York Times ran a story in late 2016 about some of the social media, and this was before we kind of knew the depth of what had happened in the election, and but we knew that there had been obviously a great influence on Facebook. And so they interviewed these two guys that they were in their 20s. I think one had a marketing degree. I'm not sure. I can't remember what the other's degree was in. But they were making a fortune, just making money hand over fist by creating news articles that they were posting on a Facebook page. So it's completely free for them to set up this page and start to propagate this information. And it had no basis in reality. But they found that they could use tools that would engage their readers and cause them to get clicks to their page, and it's targeted advertising, so they're making so much money. But they knew which phrases they could employ, and it would be things like, we bet you won't share this, or, type I agree in the comments below, and things like that, just calls to action to get people to feel empowered in taking hold of this message. And no basis in reality. They followed them, sat with them as they typed out these completely fictional news stories and posted them. And, it is truly a brave new world. And, there's a lot to be learned from that.
Should we be holding these people responsible? Like, when I say people, Facebook, Google, Twitter, responsible for hate crimes, for
those are tough questions, and I don't.
Amy says you guys are the best panel we could have.
I don't know the answer to that. And I mean, there are a lot of, and there are people who are truly bad actors in this. They have very, malevolent intentions, and
we've talked about that when we opened our episode tonight with the idea of trolls. A troll is not something that's warm and fuzzy with a little, neon colored hair. No. This is someone who's got an intention. Thomas, you mentioned it earlier. You talked about this idea about manipulation of words and the intentional use of it. So I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because obviously this idea of stimulation and stirring up the pot does create issues. We've actually seen people taken to court because someone has taken their life because someone has said, "Yeah, go ahead and commit suicide. You're not worth it." And that person actually was held responsible on a social media platform. So it's going to be an interesting conversation here to hear your perspective on that.
Well, it's interesting that I'm familiar with what you're talking about, and those people who have been taken to court are individuals and not corporations, not conglomerates.
Why is that then?
Follow the money. I mean, if you look at it, there is so much power today in media to influence. And I think what we've done is that we have allowed that to happen to ourselves. I'll tell you one thing, and as a social studies guy who used to teach civics, we've taken civic education out of schools. And one thing that we did with civic education, civics is a separate standalone course. One thing that we did is we taught a lot of this. Civic responsibility. We taught how to do due diligence. You can do those things in other social studies classes, English classes, especially in those two specifically. But as we have, I think, reduced the focus on the importance of critical thinking, analytical thinking towards what we're receiving, that's opened us up for the potential to be manipulated. We're so busy being entertained, and we thrive off the drama of the moment. So if a news outlet uses an adjective instead of, stay away from adjectives, because now when you use an adjective, you are putting an interpretation on what that person's action is.
To judgment.
Trump gives a speech. Trump gives a horrendous speech, embarrassing speech, a glorious speech, a triumphant speech. Those are descriptors. And when you get out beyond Trump gives a speech, then you start to pay attention to adjectives. The adjectives that people use in headlines, that talking heads use in giving the news, those will tell you what their perception is, what their opinion is. And so I think we have kind of created Pandora's box. I don't know how we get the genie back in the bottle, really.
Chris,
please.
No, I don't know how we get the genie back in the bottle either. But I do think that that a lot of that goes to the fact that especially with social media, but really with all forms of media, people, speaking generally again, they've created an echo chamber. There's so much to the fact that if you want to, and no matter which social media platforms you're on, no matter what radio stations you listen to, what TV networks you watch, you can create a silo of information targeted with a certain bias. And that's, I think, what we see people doing more and more. You talked about suggestion, and that's not always a bad thing. Now, Bernays, who I know you have taught about, literally wrote the book Propaganda. But there's a great story, and you can correct me, Tom, if I get this wrong. He was a marketer. He started working with those war posters in World War I, and then did some things that, he promoted smoking to women. He was one of, there's a lot of gray areas here. But one of the campaigns that he did was for pianos. And I love this story because it really shows how easily we can be susceptible to manipulation. I think, if I remember correctly, he was selling baby grands, huge pianos. So you have a very small market for that, music professors, concert pianists, that kind of thing. Most people don't have those in their house. So in order to expand his market and sell more pianos, he began to sell not the pianos, but the idea that people would benefit from having a music room in their home. And so you're shaking your head. You know this story. And, it became one of those things where, you'll have family time together. The kids will learn to play an instrument. So create this music room in your home. And then that kind of fed on itself in that, well, if that family has a music room, then maybe my family needs to have a music room. And these stories were created, and it just took on a life of its own. That is propaganda. I mean, it's marketing, but it's good propaganda too.
Yeah. And now you have people trying to get baby grands out of
right. And so now
buildings.
it's the suggestion that that you need this, and maybe your life is missing this thing that you really need to have. So.
My goodness. Well, it's interesting when you all are talking about this idea about being entertained. And here we've got, we need to have a baby grand. We need to have this, It's fascinating to me that, do you know the movie that was partially funded by the U.S. government to sway public opinion about entering World War II?
I do.
Tell us.
Casablanca.
Amazing. Follow the money. It's the suggestion, and softening it with that little bit of entertainment maybe helps us swallow the pill a little bit easier. So what is the most essential thing that we need to know, take away from our time this evening regarding a perspective in propaganda, Thomas? What is the most essential piece of information we need?
Well, after I asked you how we get the genie back in the bottle, I think we don't get the genie back in the bottle. I think we just ignore the genie. And how we ignore the genie is that we educate ourselves. We have got to pay attention. Mm-hmm. We can be our own worst enemies. If we don't think for ourselves, someone else will think for us. Mm-hmm. And they'll want to think for us because they'll want what we have, and they'll want us to give it to them freely. And if we don't think for ourselves, then we will offer that over. That could be in anything in life. Sure. But in marketing, it's our money. Mm-hmm. In politics, it's our vote. In television, it's our viewership. Ask questions. I think it really has to start with this. What do I believe? It goes back to fundamentals. What do I believe? What do I stand for? What do I really think? Not what everyone on social media thinks. Not what my friends on social media think. I saw a very I won't mention names, but today I saw a very famous actor, comedian, who was speaking about a politician. And the headline on this story, on this news channel, was, all of the people that I like and admire do not like this politician. And so it goes back to that echo chamber, right? It's, who do I surround myself with? So am I really looking for diversity of thought? I may say, I love diversity, but really, do you? It's messy. Mm-hmm. And so we need to challenge ourselves to get outside of that echo chamber. We need to know who we are, what we stand for, what we believe, and be willing to do the due diligence of researching, is that meme true? Is that, this doesn't strike me as right. If something is going like wildfire, that ought to be the first red flag. This might happen, this may not happen. I need to find out because it's about to sway public opinion. So I think that's a big takeaway. Educate yourself, know what you believe, and think for yourself. Think critically, sharpen those skills.
That's awesome. How about you, Chris? It's an essential piece.
I think first and foremost, we have to admit and understand that we are all susceptible to it. And I think that that's true no matter how much you research, how strongly held your beliefs are, that we're all human and we're all susceptible to suggestion and manipulation. And so much of this, especially in the political arena right now, is fear-based. There's so much that is driven by that I saw a clip. Again, I won't talk about the topic, but it was a clip from a news show that it was around the time of this past midterm election in 2018 of a breaking news alert during a news program. And it had all the hallmarks of propaganda. I mean, there was literally a red light. There was ominous music that came on. There were, all caps about this and colors that are designed to play on our psyche, red and all of this. And the subject of this alert was neither breaking nor was it actual news. And it was fear-based propaganda. It was designed to plant seeds and manipulate viewers. And it's hard, no matter how much you think you know and how much you think you are in control of your own thought processes, not to be susceptible to that on some level. So it requires self-reflection. It really does. It requires self-reflection and a desire to want to do better. When we know better, we do better. And I think that you have to have that desire.
Can I add one thing that, that's great, Chris. I don't want to throw our current society under the bus because we let a newspaper send us to a war in the Spanish-American War when Hearst wanted to sell papers. He pushed what today would be called fake news. All right, that term may be political, but it wasn't then because it was lies. And there were stories that were fabricated to make America want to intervene just to sell papers. It was to make money. And we went to war over it. We bought it hook, line, and sinker as a people. And you would think, oh, well, that was the 1890s. We should be so much smarter. But are we? So I hope that listeners really understand that stakes are high. Mm-hmm. It's not just one election. It's not just buying this car or that car. It's really letting other people determine what you read, what you think, and are you really thinking for yourself?
And that concludes part 1 of our conversation with Tom Riddle and Chris Worthy about how words influence and direct perspective. Come back next week for part 2 of our conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to the AfterwordPodcast.com, to like us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember that you are welcome to join us at our table